All right, and welcome to our latest episode of our Higher Education Leadership Series. I am Dr. Tony Edwards, and I'm our Higher Education Leadership Concentration Chair for our Masters of Educational Administration program at Tarleton State University. And we are delighted today to talk with one of the most prominent leaders in higher education in the United States of America, none other than Dr. Mordecai Brownlee over at the Community College of Aurora. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Edwards. I appreciate. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I have an immense amount of respect for you as an educator, and so any way I can make myself available, I will.
Thank you so much. Means a lot. So if we're going to start out, I know you have transitioned from being in Texas and being a higher education leader in Texas and then moving to Colorado to take the presidency there at Community College of Aurora. Please talk for a minute about, how Community College of Aurora fits into maybe the larger picture of how community colleges and universities are organized in Colorado, because it is a little different than the way things are done in Texas.
I will tell you, it's a whole lot different. I think as we think about the state of Texas, essentially you have the three-legged stool. Now I'm kind of getting into funding policy, but compensation models here, just so you can see the picture of it. Because when it comes to Texas, you have 50 taxation districts. These taxation districts allow for there to be funding mechanisms that come not only from local taxes, then you have the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board that is in funding uh, directly sustainability to those institutions as well. And then you have the institution drawing their own tuition and fees. So you've got head count and FTE and success point aspects of a formula, along with local taxation, along with tuition and fees. And then we're not even talking about grants yet. So it would almost really be a four-legged stool. We don't have that here. And
Hmm.
it's the reason why, because I say that, it's the reason why as I tell this picture really quickly in terms of composition, it will all make sense. We're ranked 48th in the country in higher ed funding. And a lot of people don't know that. And it is because of how our taxation system is designed. Colorado, more than 20 years ago, almost went bankrupt as a state.
Hmm.
And what it did was, now we're almost going 30 years ago now, I think about this. What it did to protect itself from ever getting into that situation ever again was they created a systems of control like umbrellas. And it's referred here as the Taxpayer Bill of Rights called Tabor. And then on top of Tabor, they have what's called Gallagher. Both of those entities essentially shape a umbrella system to whereas state taxation occurs, not local taxation, as state taxation occurs, then once it hits a certain revenue threshold, the money does not go to education. It doesn't go to higher education. It doesn't go to first responders. It doesn't go to the Department of Transportation. It's the reason why our potholes are massive. You can come here and take pictures of the potholes. What it does is the money goes back to the people.
Hmm.
And so it comes in the form of a refund check. Now, to go to the composition question, now to help your class understand why we're structured the way that we are. There were many more community colleges in this state, historically speaking. They tanked, they couldn't make it. And they had reached a point essentially where they says, look, we've got an arc of sorts that we've built called the Colorado Community College System. If you want to be a part of this arc, if your community won't be able to survive with its own community college, you've got to come into this arc called the CCCS. But here's the catch. If you come over into this arc, you've got to dismantle your boards. You don't get to keep your own boards. Essentially, we've got a state board that's been appointed by the governor. What we will allow you to keep is an advisory council. And what we'll do is that because our state is only funded on FTE, not head count, not success points, none of that. It is FTE funding. Outside of that, tuition and fees on what you accrue on your own, and then what you go after in terms of grants. If you think you can make it, great. Well, you got some schools then to where 13 all came under the umbrella called Colorado Community College System.
Hmm.
However, in the mountains, we're called the Front Range here, the urban. In the mountains, you got Colorado Mountain College.
Okay.
They had a strong enough infrastructure to where they didn't have to come into the arc. They felt as though they had it figured out. And what they did was they used revenues from the ski industry to
Hmm.
help cover that. Well, probably then the strongest standalone community college that we have is called Ames Community College. Ames is not a part of the Colorado Community College system, but the beauty of Ames was their land is sitting on top of oil. it's the land of milk and honey out there. So it looks like a 4-year university out there. I mean, they get everything that they want. And so in order to control that, they maintain their own boards. So 13 colleges within the Colorado Community College system, not accounting for Ames Community College, not accounting for Colorado Mountain College.
Right.
And then I think it's important for your students to know too, it gets even more interesting because Colorado looks maybe more closer to Georgia when it
Mm,
comes to its technical college system. We have a technical college system that sits separately than the community college system, but interestingly, they are associated with the K-12 system. So we can't run public bonds. I can't go after local taxation as a community college in this state, but the technical colleges can, and they run as bonds under the K-12 umbrella.
mm. Well, that really helps to kind of color the landscape in terms of what you have access to and what you don't have access to. And I think as leaders, I think it's you don't think about what are the tools that you have in the tool belt. Sometimes you think, okay, I'm going to be a president and I manage academic affairs and student affairs and enrollment management, but there's there's funding, and every state's got their own funding model, and that can have a huge impact on your ability to build and retain revenue for your institution. So that's very powerful. I know in Texas we have a higher education coordinating board that
Mhm.
it's part of that executive branch of the state government, and they interact obviously with both the community colleges and the universities. Uh, does Colorado have anything similar to that?
It does, but it doesn't move the same.
Hmm.
I will share with your students. I used to be the community college chair for Applied Texas on the Texas Education Coordinating Board.
Okay.
THECB, it operated as a clearinghouse more
Mhm.
than anything based on its infrastructure. What we have here is the Colorado Department of Higher Education, but they are not our clearinghouse. And I think that that's part of the power struggle. The Department of Higher Education here in Colorado support legislative matters. They have no oversight over any of the 4-year community college institutions. There is no money funneling through them
Mm.
other than what are more like grant supplemental dollars.
Mm.
So I think that they are engaged in that work to be able to lead that narrative, but it is not designed, it is by no means designed the same.
Interesting. Okay. Well, that's extremely helpful. Now, I know in Texas we have this, legislative cycle that begins every, 2 years, and it's about a 6-month process where folks kind of try to get their, legislative requests for higher education in terms of, whether they're uh, funding for buildings or, various projects and things of that nature. How does that work in Colorado?
So our legislative cycle runs, it's interesting. It's about roughly 120 days. And it runs from January till about, that whatever that 120-day mark. So you're talking 4 months. It gets interesting because we just had special session.
Mm.
Special session was roughly 2 weeks ago. It's now been the second time that we've been called into special session, and it can get interesting. So, the off cycle for us are the other 8 months of the year, but there are certain matters that they will call special session over, that requires an all-in approach. It was expected that 2 weeks ago special session was only going to last 72 hours. There was no way that they can get it done because of what was being proposed and what was being fought. And I would just share with your students that's another aspect of my job of me to be legislatively engaged. I had to provide testimony to the House and to the Senate. They were
Mm.
seeking to take roughly $140 million away from our Colorado community college system.
Mm.
I would have had to raise tuition by 49%.
Mm.
There were two political entities that were seeking to force our elected officials that they were going to go to ballot in November, called Initiative 50 and 108. 108 would have been Armageddon for us of what that would have done in terms of stripping not only for higher ed but for first responders. I think it's good too for your students to know we deal with wildfires pretty significantly
Mm.
out here in our state, and what they were talking about taking away in terms of resourcing it made no sense. But it comes down to the realities of our taxation system that you heard me explain to your students. And so all that to say, 120 days, January to what would that take us to? April. Then we end but then you got to prepare and hang on for special session.
Yeah, we have those too here, and they can be interesting. But you know, I think that it's important to know their session and then their special session, and it sounds like that is a trend that happens in Colorado as well. Um, Now, I know there have been some recent changes. So I remember hearing about a funding scenario where students who wanted to access community college education, would get essentially funding to be able to do so. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and maybe some other recent changes?
So, great question, Dr. Edwards. There is a movement that is currently taking place here in the state, as where they are looking to make institutions of higher education more affordable. It is very important too for your students to know that given how a state funds its higher education, will let you know whether or not the state sees its education or higher education as a public good. Unfortunately, as beautiful as Colorado is, higher education is not a public good. I've shared previously, we're ranked 48th. Our education system, our K-12 education system is ranked 47th in the country.
Okay.
Okay, so then put this in the context with the free education, the free community college movement. The state has looked at Tennessee's, the Tennessee Promise. It's looked at the Dallas College, Dallas Promise. It's looked at the Alamo Promise, and it's trying to figure out with its taxation structure, how can we get in on that? Well, you heard me talk about Tabor and Gallagher. So then what the state ended up doing was they says, okay, we can't do it pre-tax because we're not built for that, but we can do it within the actual filing cycle. So what the state then said was, is if you want to pursue higher education, great, but you got to earn less than $70,000 a
Mhm.
year. If you earn less than $70,000 a year, and you got to double check me on that. I think that's for a family, a married filing joint. I think is that number
Okay.
for $70,000. Then you can pay for your classes, but claim it as a Colorado resident,
Okay.
and then we give you a rebate back to you. Well, then I think it's important for your students to know then, well, are we really increasing access? Because you got to have the money in order to do it. And then on top of that, there's this other there's all this fine print. Y'all know there's fine print to everything. So now you got to look at the fine print because it's not only $70,000 and you pay for your classes, you claim it on the back end, then you get the rebate. Well, what about your Pell eligibility? So the
Right.
state is now going to look at what you file in terms of your financial aid. And if there is the cost of tuition, the cost of attendance is going to look at that threshold and see if there is additional expenses on top of what you've already been allotted from the federal government. Well, it ain't going to give you a check on top of that. It's going to say, well, if your cost of attendance is this, you don't
Right.
need any of this. Spread that wealth somewhere else. Well, in comes community colleges now saying, well, hold on, y'all are not really helping us. What you're really doing is helping the four-year institutions. Because if you're already Pell eligible with us, you don't have an additional debt. You don't have any additional expenses to cover. So this then goes into what I would tell your students, you always got to trace the dollar, and that will help you understand who's really a part of the movement. Well, while it was all about free college and free access, the lobbyists who really ran that bill were the four-year institutions seeking to create higher enrollment and finding a mechanism to be able to do it.
Yeah, as a person who studies higher education history, you do have to follow the money. And so uh, there's always reasons why people do what they do, and usually enrollment somewhere in there. But I think in terms of where we are, and you talked a little bit about this, the engagement. But if you were to sort of break down what this kind of policy engagement or leaders engagement with political, uh legislative government folks, what that really kind of boils down to, what are some of the best practices you've noticed?
I would tell anyone that's seeking to do this work or be anywhere associated with this work, it is so important that you maintain relationships with your legislators outside of cycle. Don't play the game of trying to establish relationships right before cycle and during cycle. I mean, that's like trying to call somebody in the middle of their job. I mean, that's what they do. So that now's not the time. It's the established relationships that'll get you through. I mean, heck, when we found out we were going to special session, I got on my phone and I hit up all of my elected officials, even federal, saying, "Listen, reach out to me if you got a question. Let me know. Don't, even your aides." Forgive me if this is not the question you asked, but I got to go into this.
Yeah.
You got to remember these elected officials, everyone has their specialty. Everyone, while they have a passion for higher education, they have not been trained in higher education. So then they're at the mercy of their legislative aides. That's
Hmm.
the other relationship you need to have. You got to be friends with these legislative aides because when they get in a jam and they need to answer a question for that elected official, it's the aide that's then going to be in their ear and give them policy advice. And so I would say that everyone wants to shake the hand of the person that got elected, get to know their staff, make sure they know you on a first name basis. And so that's not only afforded me different opportunities, I've had a chance to testify to the U.S. Congress about the need for there to be short term Pell. And maybe we could talk about that another day, but being able to do that. And then you can get the call from your local legislator saying, "Hey, Mordecai," Senator Janet Buckner's one that reaches out. Senator Rhonda Fields, they'll reach out and say, "Mordecai, this is coming across my desk. What are your thoughts? I need to understand the impact." So you only get to those kind of relationships by developing the relationships off legislative cycle, off period. And then when it's game time, then they know that they can trust you.
Right. Well, and that again boils down to as leaders, it all comes down to relationships and communication. If you don't have relationships with people, I mean, even though technically we work in a, college environment and people do collect a salary, people do stuff because of the relationship they have with you. It might get
That's,
done, but it gets done more quickly if you have a relationship. If you
that's right.
don't, it gets done when they get a chance to, which usually is a long time before you need it, or after you need it, really. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, again, as a person who's training future higher education leaders, you're working in the field. Uh, are there skills that you're seeing or knowledge that you're seeing that's, you know, maybe when you came through your programs, maybe they weren't teaching this, or maybe things that you wish more higher education leaders came equipped at certain things. What would some of those things be?
Three things quickly that come to mind, Dr. Edwards. One thing is that it's important to train yourself to be a practitioner. What I mean by that is don't rely on positional authority. I think that if we look at the previous eras of higher education, positional authority, that's Dr. So and so who's the title, holds this title. You got to respect them. We live in a day and time now was I don't care what your title is. If you don't, or if you're not competent,
Mhm.
people have a way of exposing that. And I think that it used to be to where positional authority cover the vulnerabilities of the leaders. Not today, not in today's society. Smell in authenticity, lack of authenticity. They can smell lack of confidence and competence. And so you want to be trained as a practitioner as you seek these opportunities because that's what will truly sustain you now more than ever. I think that the second thing that I would say that Dr. Edwards said needs to be trained is how one maintains their wellness in these roles. And I don't know how much conversation is happening programmatically that says, I'll tell you all, I've been president now three years and plus. There's presidents that started when I did, they're not presidents anymore. They just they it swallowed them up. And every presidency or vice presidency or executive role is different given the cultures and the realities of that particular institution. If you aren't prepared, your family isn't prepared, your relationships are not prepared, you don't have a good sense of where you are in terms of your own physical health and wellness, these jobs will swallow you whole.
Mhm.
So you need to be in tune with that. The third thing I would then say too is contractual negotiation.
Mhm.
And I don't know how much these programs really focus on knowing and understanding what that contract says, how you build in protections into your contract. And it would also help your students to know that, hold on, so the president was asked to resign. They're now tenured faculty. How did that work? You got to know how these deals get structured,
Right.
your parachute, right? So that way the stories won't catch them off guard on like, well, hold on. If they so bad, why you didn't get rid of them? Well, you can't, right? They don't have conversations about deferred compensation. And they don't have conversations about how you take these positions to build wealth for you and your family, based off of the vestiture deals that you can structure for yourself. You know, they ain't talking about that, and so then you become victim to the lack of mentorship in many cases. And so, to all of this is a season. To everything, there's a season. My presidency is a season. And when this season concludes, I need to make sure that I've got things in place for myself and my family so then I remain whole and then I can move on to whatever the next season that the good Lord has for me and my family. But I got to structure it into the deal. And
Right.
I don't think programs are necessarily helping students know how those deals are structured.
Well, thank you for that feedback because we can definitely work on that now that we've seen that that's an issue. Because I think you're exactly right. Because we want our students to be at the table, but we don't want them to be unprepared when they get there. So,
You want to be on the plate. They could be at the table and they realize they showed up to get on the plate.
yep, that's exactly right. So I don't want them to be unprepared. So, but thank you so much again. I know how valuable your time is, and I think that I'm so thankful that you are a giver of your knowledge and your experience, and you pass it forward. But if do you have anything else you'd like to share before we conclude for the day?
Hey, I would just tell your students if they have any follow-up questions or curiosities, feel free to reach out. I'm sure Dr. Edwards will share with you my LinkedIn information or website information. And articles are on there, other content resources are on there. Anything to support your journey, I'll find ways to make myself available to you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mordecai. And it's always good to see you. You're always doing big things, and we encourage you, look forward to what you're going to be doing in the future. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you in the next episode.